Welcome everybody. Good evening, friends, colleagues, leaders, officers, educators, academics. Thanks very much for your presence here. Leaders of companies, the corporate sector. It's a great privilege to stand in front of you today. Thanks for making time. The Legacy Leadership Team welcomes you. It's Sister Gwendoline Jacobs, she's on the team. Professor Darelle from the university. She's busy because the Minister of Health is down at the university. And then Paulson is probably on his way. So on behalf of all of them, welcome. In brief, the Legacy Leadership program and a series of meetings that will be held here is really for the purpose of sharing among equals information to just raise our level of information and leadership capacity jointly, and it's a multilateral sharing process, so not just a one-way process. So the aim is to get experts and credible leaders in, like Prof Deon Pretorius, and it was fortuitous. I think Billy was playing golf with you.
Yeah.
And then he called me. This is how things happen.
Yeah.
And so golf again. Right? And called me and asked me if you'd like to have coffee with Deon. We had one meeting and we decided that the next stop would be on using information and stats to create a platform to see how we can address social problems and developmental problems, which Prof Deon Pretorius is very passionate about. So some of you might not have read the email. I didn't get this from you.
Okay.
But the internet is quite open. So he's the owner of Development Partners, Associate Professor and Director of Research Institute at NMMU from 1983 to 2006. He has an interest in development planning, sociology and demographics, measurement of development by way of indicators. As a socio-economic research manager and managing director of Development Partners, his recent work includes leading specialist teams conducting the following: community quality of life measurement, social demographic analysis, community social and economic profiling, alternative approaches to corporate social investment, industrial development strategy development, industrial sector research, poverty alleviation strategy development, local socio-economic strategy development, socio-economic policy development, and urban agriculture policy development. So he stands on a very credible platform. I'm sure all of you are very excited to be here tonight. It's not going to be an airy fairy talk, it's going to be hardcore. He asked if he could just go through his presentation. You can jot your questions down. And you've got your phones if you have paper as well. Just make a note. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very honored. And always so pleased to see the familiar faces. You know, this is the thing. I mean, my kids are, I've got 4 children, and there's only one left in the house, and the other 3 are part of the demographic phenomenon that I often describe in the city, is that when they graduate, they leave the city. Okay? We at the university know about that phenomenon. So my 3 kids are in Johannesburg and elsewhere. They say to me, "Dad, come here, because there's more exciting work for you here. Those guys down there don't appreciate you." And I say to them, you know what? I've been here since 1983, and I've invested so much in this community. I've worked in almost every part of the city. I will challenge anyone that could stand up and talk for 2 hours without notes about the city and give you facts and figures. I can do that because I'm not boasting. That is what I've been doing in all this time, So I've been involved in the city, I've worked in all the communities, and I see my students everywhere, and I see the familiar faces. Were you a student of mine? Yes. Yeah, there you go. I remember the faces. And my friend Smint here was also recently one of my master's students. I don't think there are any other students, are there? I don't think so. In any case, as I say, it's nice to see familiar faces and friendly faces. And I know, of course, Isaac and myself go back many, many years for all these dramas of the education system of the city for many, many years. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about information for decision making, information for planning, for development, good information with regards to local communities in particular. So when I start talking about specifics, I'm going to come to the communities of this area. Okay? I'm not going to talk about the other profiles of the studies. I've just completed a study on Ward 1 and 2, Summerstrand and those areas. I might refer to that for comparative purposes, but my focus will be on these areas. And what I want to, in particular, I'm not being paid by Stats SA to do this. I do it because I really think we are underappreciating. I really think we are underappreciating the value and the usefulness of our census. And I want to, in particular, talk about how we can use the census better in terms of informing decision making on a local level. So why? I'm just going to be a little bit provocative in terms of why do we need to be so preoccupied with good quality information in our particular context? And then I'm going to play around with a few profiles, in other words, information about our specific local communities, and then I'm going to do one or two illustrations of what can be done with that, with regards to specific issues and research that I've been involved in the very recent time. I'm inclined to talk too much around my text, so I'm going to try and be disciplined because I don't want to run out of time. I was introduced, I'm not going to say anything more about myself. Let's go and immediately talk about the why. Why do we need to be so concerned about quality information in our society? One of the first reasons that I would want to put on the table is because we are, as a society, in my view, over-politicized. There's a famous American sociologist, which is one of my idols of the 1960s, C. Wright Mills. Many of you who did sociology might remember C. Wright Mills. He was motorbike riding, long hair, bit of a rebel. And if you knew me in the 1980s and 90s, that was I looked like I cleaned up my act significantly. But I was also one of those bearded, long hair, kind of motorbike kind of academics. And he was a rebel. He was known for critical sociology, radical sociology. And what he did was, in the 1960s, he did an analysis, an institutional analysis of the American society. And he asked the question, where is power located? Where is it concentrated? In which institutions of society? And he produced a famous book, which you might have seen the title, and the word power elite has become used because of the work of C. Wright Mills. He produced the work, the power elite. And what he found was that in the USA, power is concentrated in the corporate sector, in the business sector. It dominates the politics, in other words, to a certain extent. It's a bit of a simplification. Of course, you've got to look at the complexity of the argument, but that is essentially what Mills argued. I recently did sort of superficially the same kind of analysis in the South African society. And I asked myself, which of our institutions, the spheres of society, in other words, the church, the NGO sector, the political, the polity, the corporate sector, the business sector, where is the power concentrated? trumps who dominates who overrules who, which one's deployment gets preference. And the conclusion that I came to is that it is the polity, it's the political system in South Africa that dominates the society. To the extent that I want to almost say that it's unhealthy. I want to almost go as far as to say that it's a systemic flaw. My area of studied under Margaret Archer at the University of Warwick in England, and what she taught me was about understanding social systems and the balances and imbalances within social systems and how institutional systems relate to one another. And these things come relatively easy for me, and I might, elaborate too much on that. So the conclusion that I come to in the South African society is that the political dominates. And to put it in more explicit terms, is that you find things like political deployment that overrules others. So if someone is being instructed by the political leadership to go here, to go there, to take that position, or to take, we just obey. We just follow. We go where we've been told. Decision-making, political decision-making has been elevated to the level of the sacrosanct. It's almost untouchable. The political leadership has become almost untouchable. Yes, it's changed recently. It is changing, but we had a time in the society when the political party, particularly the dominant party, and political leadership was almost untouchable. You elevated to a very, very high level. And that you say within a systemic sense. In other words, you ask the question, how does the other institutions of society balance out what happens in this particular institution? And you see that there's an imbalance. Political leaders, in other words, are given leeway that actually contradicts the principles of representation, participatory or developmental democracy. It almost goes against those very principles that we are articulating. We have a government that is, in a sense, over-resourced, overextended, high on province and low on capacity. That's the irony. You have this enormous amount of power invested in the entity that we call the political institution. A lot of resources go into that. And yet, the irony is that a lot of skill have been phased out of that particular institution. And when I'm talking about the polity, I'm defining it broadly. I'm talking about political parties, I'm talking about government, and I'm talking about these different levels. Polity. Okay? So on the one hand, you have this entity in your society that has elevated power and status, and nevertheless has limited capacity to deliver in a contemporary language that we use. That's not the worst problem as I see it. The real problem is that the rest of the society has accepted that as a normal state of affairs. In other words, the leadership of the other sectors of society have, for different reasons, decided to almost step back. I've done a lot of work with churches over the last year or so, and I actually fight with church leaders, and I say things to them that I don't think other people say to them. I say to them, you've got to wake up. I say to the Anglican Church leadership, where were you 20 years ago? Bishop Tutu was leading the way, and the Anglican Church were in the schools. They were busy out there. They were activists in our society. Today, the Anglicans are nothing. I'm sorry if the Anglicans are around here, I don't want to offend anyone, but the Anglicans are not out there in the society. They're struggling for survival. And I say to them, the reason why you're struggling to survive is because you're not relevant. You're not out there in your society. And it's not only them. I said the same thing to the NG Academy in their synod last year. I was the only external speaker at the synod. And I said to them, sorry, Germans, ek moet vir julle sê, dis was in die slaap, julle moet wakker skrik. Ek soek moeilikheid, nee. Okay, so what I'm talking about is a self-imposed marginalization of the other sectors of the society. The NGO sector at some point almost became non-existent in our society. The corporate sector has pulled back and is only involved in superficial, self-serving corporate social investment that really is just window dressing and putting their brand out there. Sorry for those of you in the corporate sector. And I'm stereotyping because not everyone's doing it. But that sense of taking co-responsibility for the society is what's relatively absent. And make no mistake, if you analyze this phenomenon, you can explain it. You can understand why it happened in our history. That the political movement that liberated the society got elevated to that position and was given carte blanche. We can understand that there's a good history behind it. However, we need to now get to a point where we need to get over that. And the other parties of society need to start becoming a little bit more certain. That's the point that I'm making. So, institutions in society, and whichever institutions you find yourself in, I think it applies to almost all of them. Whether it's the church, whether it's the university, whether it is the corporate sector, whether it's the NGOs, all of them, I believe, need to be challenged to have a look again at their core business and what I refer to as their secondary business. All of them do have a secondary business. And that secondary business has to do with taking your responsibility for being a citizen, an entity in the society, and taking co-responsibility for the well-being of the society at large. So it's not something that is a simple add-on. It's not something that should not be part of what you do. And in fact, it's one of the things that I quite enjoy talking to people in the corporate sector, as I was just saying to Isaac, challenging people in the corporate sector to understand that engagement with communities in the developmental sense of the word is actually in their own interest. As long as they see the bigger picture and as long as they understand that what they're doing is they're creating a better society and ultimately a better market and an economy in which they can also thrive. By standing back from that, they are in fact undermining their own situation. And you can see it in this city. You can see it in this metro. How businesses have just closed because the general environment has become depressed. And there's economic downturn. Now I'm saying to the corporates, come on, you see what's happening around you. Why aren't you involved? Why don't you contribute to making sure that the economy at large and the socio-economic economy that underpins that thrives, and so that you can also benefit from that. The Americans talk about enlightened self-interest. It's a very interesting concept. Self-interest, but within a broader context. So, I'm challenging them to become more assertive. I'm not promoting a power struggle with politics. That's not what it's about. Politicians have their role and their place, but we mustn't overestimate and exaggerate. It's more a question of the rest of us that must wake up and take up our responsibility. Co-responsibility for development. The problem is that in an over-politicized environment, decisions are excessively informed by political considerations and unduly influenced by power differentials. That's the problem. So if your environment is usually political in its culture, the way that we make decisions is not about giving me the good facts and information about the situation. It's about who I know and what power I can wield and what influence I can have. That influences decisions, and you all know what I'm talking about. So that is the problem with an over-politicized environment, and that gives you an idea of why I'm promoting information. Because I'm saying that we've got to find a way to counter that excessive political currency for decision making with something else, and that's good information. Okay? Good quality information. Information-based decision making is, in other words, a way of countering that. better quality information, a culture of research, a culture of information exchange like is happening here. It's one of the first ways of pushing back the overextended polity without reproducing the problem that one's trying to solve. You don't get into a street battle, you don't get into a political battle with it. That's not the point. Don't go fight the politicians. Do what you must do with the responsibility that you have in your sphere of society. But also stop asking permission to the politicians. We are also inclined to do that. There's a church group that I dealt with a while ago that every time that they want to do something of significant proportions, they make an appointment with the mayor. You know, it's almost like asking permission. I said, no. You have the right to do what's in your sphere in society. You don't have to ask permission for everything. I'm not saying don't fight the mayor. I don't say don't engage with the mayor. But it's the mentality with which you do. Yeah. It's that submissive mentality with which you do. Okay? I heard someone say yes. The other problem that we have is that we are over-centralized and under-localized, if I can coin the phrase. Okay? Over-centralized, that's part of our general and our specific political culture, is also to make us centralist. It's almost part of the political ideology. Okay? Political ideology being centralist. But it's part of the political culture of being top-down. It makes the rest of the society always look upwards and waiting for things to come from up above, to put it in those terms. So, always centralizing, and the indication is that we're neglecting the local. We're neglecting the local. I recently asked three friends of mine, who are politically astute guys. I asked them to illustrate this point. I asked them, if I had a group of emerging leaders, young people sitting in front of me, and I want to get people out of our community in this city, that I can put in front of those people and say, speak to these young people and be a role model for them. Be a role model as a leader. Tell them what you do and so on. And I asked them, give me names of leaders in the local context. Okay? Now I'm going to mention the names that they gave me. It's beside the point, but there's a sort of pitch in the tail there. They gave me names: Nkabisi Jones, Lincoln Marble, Stone Cezanne, Bongani Khalishwa, Lulu Johnson. And by the time they got to about 6, I said to them, okay, all right, so what are the characteristics that these comrades have in common? Obvious, male, Xhosa speaking, members of the ANC. I said, yes, that's quite predictable, isn't it? But there's another very interesting phenomenon, and who of you can pick that one up? With those names, tell me what is interesting about them. Which is relevant. I'm looking for something else.
Struggle history?
Yeah. It's ANC. I'm looking for something else. I'm sure no one of you are going to think about that, but it's very obvious the moment that I'm going to say it. They were all born here, and no one of them are here anymore. They're all gone. They're all gone. And then I said to them, let's go on with this list. And that list went on. And you know, there was probably 1 out of 10, as the list goes on, that actually remained. So I said to them, you know what you're seeing? You're seeing the centralization of talent. The moment someone is seen as a talented leader in this country, they centralize you. They pull you up to the center. And then these guys came to the conclusion themselves. They said, and you know what that explains? That explains our leadership crisis at a local level. I said, yeah, that's the thing. Because our leaders go elsewhere. It's the same phenomenon as with university students that leave. The talented people go. Politicians, the political system draw them out, and we end up with a vacuum at the local level. What you should do wouldn't be a revolutionary concept if you let's invert this whole pyramid and say, let's make these people that have been pulled to the top, let's bring them down to the local and get local talent. And then the discussion got a little bit utopian in the sense of we were saying, what if we do that with education? If we make education a really high status job in this country, and we make it really attractive for people to teach at the lowest levels, which is most important, like at the foundation level, high status, high salary, and we get our most talented people down at that level in society. Maybe there's some logic. But the point that we're making is that we are consistently centralizing, we are neglecting the local, and we're not holding on to our local talent. The other very important thing is that, and I'm more back to information now, the very other important problem with centralization is that in a top-down perspective is that you miss out on vital and critical information. Okay? So the top-down perspective, the one that looks at the society from the top, so to speak, sees certain types of things and it doesn't see other things. Now that sounds like an obvious statement, but it's got significant implications. Let's take, for example, a national industrial development strategy that is being designed at the national level. What do those people at the national level look at? They look at how to make this country competitive in an international economy. Okay, so they analyze the country in that global competitive contesting kind of situation. And they ask questions about the kind of industries that we need to promote. I led the team that wrote the industrial development strategy for the city. So I participated in exactly that same discussion. So you, at a national level, the national will say to you, let's prioritize economic sector X, Y, and Z. Why? Because they will make us competitive internationally. That's where the things are happening in the global economy. However, if you look at that same sector of the economy, let's say it's the pharmaceutical sector, you look at the same sector of the economy, any one that requires maths and science, and you look at it from a community level, then that policy suddenly doesn't make any sense to you anymore. Because you don't see the people around you that can go into that system. So you've got to temper that top-down perspective with ground-level local information in order to come to something that's practically implementable. I'll never forget, in that, I refer to David Paulson. You all know who David Paulson is. He's the CEO of Volkswagen. That was part of that discussion group for the industrial development strategy. And some of the people said to us, to our team, competitiveness. We've got to become a competitive city. And David Paulson, very wisely and astutely, just sat back and said, guys, be careful. Don't talk glibly about being internationally competitive. It's easy to say that at a policy level, but to implement that in real terms require that you do things over a period of time of significant investment in order to build the capacity to get there. You've got to know what you're talking about. You just can't choose a sector and you're going to become internationally competitive. And he knows what he's talking about because he's the CEO of Volkswagen, which is an internationally competitive company. But there's also another set of information that one needs to know in the case of Volkswagen. And that's why he's so acutely aware of what he's talking about. Volkswagen and the motor manufacturing sector in South Africa is hugely subsidized by the government. Go and have a look at the money in the budget every year that goes into the motor manufacturing sector in order to make it survive and competitive. If you withdraw that subsidization, it's common knowledge in South Africa. It's common knowledge. If you withdraw that, the motor manufacturing in South Africa could collapse. It is so hugely subsidized. So to be competitive is not just something that happens, and you've got to see these things not just from a top-down perspective. You've got to look at it from a local level. Then there's the last tendency that's about information and information at the local level that concerns me deeply. This tendency, particularly in this intro, of waiting for the big ship to arrive. You know what I'm talking about? We wait for the big project that's going to save us all. The big Kucha project and Kucha's sub-projects. Once it comes, we will have employment for everyone. And the economy will be buoyant. And it will just happen. Now, I'm not saying that we should not have ambitious and big plans. But you know, if you look closely at most of those big developments, the extent to which they actually favor the local community is actually much less, much more limited than you anticipate. And that's got to do with the fact that in view of one's own limited human resources pool, skills are often brought out from the outside. Opportunities for locals are often at a very low level and often much less. They're initially significant in construction phase, but they become less when you get beyond that point. So I'm not again saying no, we mustn't do that, but what I'm saying is that we should stop neglecting the local community level economy. Okay? We must see these things not as an either or. We tend to almost see it as an either or. What is wrong and what is problematic is that there seems to be a sentiment that says a community is not an economic development zone. Okay? We have economic development zones and industrial development zones in dedicated parts of the city, and economic activity gravitates towards that. And we are not giving enough attention to the fact that a community, a sustainable community, has got its own economy. I mean, the theory of sustainable communities is a wonderful thing that is actually being used at a theoretical and rhetorical level in the city. If we could really implement it, it would be exciting. But what a real sustainable community entails is, amongst other things, its own economy. The capacity to produce and to create employment, to generate income, to reinvest in your own community, and to build an economy, and very often largely in response to the needs of that particular community. And that's one of the exciting things in much of the work that I always do with profiling of communities. I actually look at those socio-economic challenges, and I identify in those the opportunities for entrepreneurship, opportunities for people to do things that create jobs, that creates incomes. Maybe initially it is at a low level, but that's where support can come in. That's where I would like to see subsidization, to help those kinds of activities get off the ground and grow. So, from a sustainability perspective, we need to, communities must be seen as relatively self-reliant, ideally being able to provide for some, if not all, of their local needs. Question arises, in other words, where's the economy of Bloemendal? Where's the economy of, and so many areas that you drive through, that you go and you visit and you get to know, and Billy Paulson gets quite excited about this when he starts listing all the things that are not here, the things that should be here, because we consume these things. This is part of our lives. But why do we have to go there and there and there in order to get these things? These are opportunities for local business. That is not happening here. But again, the policy incentives doesn't seem to be there. You know, you need to encourage those things. You need to nurture them, because at the outset, it's going to be difficult for them to survive. So unmet needs. That's why I'm in urban agriculture. And I started becoming interested in urban agriculture because I did poverty alleviation strategy. And I realized that one of the ways in which you're going to get the community economy going is to promote the food economy at a local community. And that makes me interested in things like small-scale hydroponics and community farming and all of those kinds of things. Exciting things that are possible. And I'm not just talking about these things, I actually become involved in them. I'm involved in a number of these kinds of projects at the moment, to the the extent that I'm even now becoming involved in agriculture outside of the city. I started to work with human store co-op this morning. I'm baffled with where I end up, but now I'm suddenly in agriculture. I'm suddenly beyond the farmer. Okay, so the question is, again, where do we get that information? Because we cannot just shoot in the dark about our communities. We think we know our communities. Yes, we know our communities, but we know our communities in an idiosyncratic kind of way, from our particular angle, from our own subjectivity. If you want to make good decisions, you've got to get good information. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's what we try to do. I have started working with Stats South Africa in 2006, when the estimates of the population of the city in that stage ranged between 1.8 million and something like 1.3 million. The city needed an answer to that question. I formed a team, we did a study. Stats SA's projection of the figure, total population figure of the metro was 1.1 million. No one believed it. Everyone said it's an undercount. We know there was an undercount in the census. We can't believe Stats SA. And I can tell you today, you can believe it. Because we did a study and we confirmed that 1.1 million. Not even the 1.4 million, but close to 1.8 million, and still no one wanted to believe us. We appointed some of the best demographic experts in South Africa to work out a verification strategy. We went into this city, literally down to local level, and we had a methodology and a strategy in order to verify that count, and we were spot on. Same as the two previous counts, and still they didn't want to believe us, and I said to them, wait until census 2011. That will be the day when we will be verified. 2011 stats come, we were absolutely spot on. Now, you can imagine, Stats SA and my company and myself, we really like one another. I verified them, and they like what I'm doing. So, as a consequence, I've got a very special relationship with them. I can tell you, I've got the whole census, 52 million rows of data, 52 million, in 75 variables. It's a massive cross-tabulation. It's all on my computer. It's downloaded. It's a massive software data set. I was trained by them, like they train their own internal staff, to use that data to access that information. Someone said to me they tried to access this kind of data on the internet. Yes, it's available, but unfortunately it's not so easy to use it. I started working with that and with Stats South Africa, and because sometimes I'm being asked to do something very quickly, I know I can do it, but I'm not as quick as they can do it. I would phone the head of the regional office 2 o'clock in the afternoon and say to him, I need 13 Excel sheets, cross-tabulated with these variables. Please can give it to me when it's convenient to you. Before the end of the day, the Excel sheet starts coming through. Before 10 o'clock the next morning, I have them all. And then I can go and sit, and I can turn them into what I'm going to show you in a moment. I can turn those Excel sheets into something which makes sense to a person in a community context. So the first thing that I want to show to you, and so let's get into some of these interesting tables. One of the first things that I did when I knew I had all this information available was to, and I was pushed by one of the church movements that wanted to a minimalist profile of every ward in the city. And can you imagine I did it? 60 wards over a period of 2 months. I produced 60 profiles with a set of essential socio-economic data. And I'll show you what it looks like. There they are. I mean, you cannot see so clearly up there, but it starts at the top, ward number 16, and it goes down right to the bottom, and I can open any of them. I'm opening the one that Gelvandale is located in, and there you have Ward 13, and there's a profile that consists of a number of tables. I'm going to come back to this just to give you an idea of it. So I did that piece of work, and then one of the things that I immediately realized was that, and you've got to excuse me now because I'm going to jump from the one file to the other. I've got to keep my head here. What I realized was that we needed a way of quickly starting with comparisons so that one can understand the significance of a particular stat. And so you need to work out indicators that can tell you when is a particular statistic significant, when does it show a red light, okay? When is it a problem situation, when is it a matter of concern, when is it a matter that you don't need to worry about. Now, that table that you have in front of you there is with regards to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 variables that were selected by what people wanted to see. Now remember, there's 75 variables. You can choose from many, many of them. That's the first exercise that I did in order to show a comparison between different wards. So you can see there that Ward 1 with place names that includes Springbok, it also includes Summerstrand. Ward number 2, Summerstrand, also includes Youngwood and so on. Walber, that excludes Govender, Newton Park, Parsons Hill, Lorraine, Sunridge. Historically white areas. And you will see there that the color of the lettering is typically black. I didn't color them because there aren't any red lights going on. Okay? So I go down, so keep an eye open for the red lights. If you go down, the first one that comes up on the screen is Gelvandale, Ward number 13, that includes Gelvandale and Barcelona. And there you see some statistics that are dramatically different from the ones that we have just looked at. Let me give you one example. One of the things that we look at is the number of people under the age of 35 in a particular area. Gelvandale is the area in the city with the highest figure as far as that is concerned. 69.6% of people in Gelvandale falls into that category. Now, if you combine that with the next one, and that is the number of people who have completed grade 12, then things start becoming interesting. So now you see that Gelvandale once again is the lowest in the city in terms of 9.25% of people having completed high school. Compared to other statistics like Ward 2 and 3, that is 66%. Can you see how dramatic that is? Someone asked me about the dropout figure. You can see what the dropout rate does, ultimately to passing and acquiring an education attainment. So that's what the picture starts looking at, and you can't see the detail, but what I'm saying to you is you see a landscape of color in front of you, in which the further I'm going to go down, the further I'm going to go into townships, and the ones that are marked blue are northern area wards. And as I go into the second half of this whole table, it becomes almost university ready. Because the indicators are all negative. They're all saying to you there's some problem there. Now remember, I selected variables that are all significant development variables. But they are the ones that if we take note of those, then we can learn something about what is wrong in our community. So there's a comparative table that takes us through all the wards of the greater Nelson Mandela Metro, including Newton Dispatch and all the smaller areas. So everything that falls within this metro boundary is included in that summary. Let me show you quickly.
Excuse me,
Yes.
can you give me some specifics on sugar at all?
I'm going to do that. Okay, let's run through this and then we can pick on specific areas. Okay. So I want to just let you have a glance at the whole list of 75 variables. List again. Remember, we're social scientists. Anyone that does work in communities that do research, they draw samples, okay? Because you don't do an audit or a census all the time, so you draw a sample. And you can get statistically, you can get away with samples that are remarkably small, okay? Below 5%, very common, for studies that make major claims to truth. And they are fantastic because you can do amazing things with a well-drawn sample, okay? But the census covers more than 95-96% of the total population. It is an enormous set of information. So to not use it well is folly. And our census is actually being modelled on international best practice. The Australian, it's right up there. They learned from the Australians. It's a fantastic census. It's a dynamic database, which means that you can come to me and you can say to me, let's take out a map. And you take your pen and you draw an area where you know your business is going to impact, or your NGO impacts, or your school or your university impacts. You can draw a line on that. You don't have to go and give me certain categories of places. You can just draw a line. And I can take that map and I go and sit down with the guys in Stats SA and I say to them, okay, let's fit in. Let's see where the enumeration units, as low down as 150 to 200 households, how they fit into this bigger picture. And I can draw that profile for you with subcategories, whichever way you want to break it up. So geography is there at the top, is one of the variables. It enables you to draw suburbs, it enables you to draw enumeration units, you can combine them, you can put them in many different kinds of ways. Okay? So it's an amazing, it's really an incredible database. And you can cross-tabulate. You know, the old census was fixed. There, in a document, it's given. You can't do much with it. It's agony to try and analyze it. Now, you can take a selection of variables. You can say, I'm only interested in age as a variable, gender as a variable, education as a variable, income as a variable. My experience is out of that 75 variables, no one has asked me for more than 14 variables. They're always different. It always reflects your particular perspective from where you come, but there's a set of variables that you pick which is relevant to you. So the set of variables that the people from Southern Strand recently asked me to pick will not have anything to do with service delivery. That's not a major issue for them. But if you go to a study in townships, everyone wants that stats about the service delivery. You know, all very significant differences. So let's have a look at what some of these profiles look like. Let's, shall I run through, let's take Ward 33. It's one of the Bettelsdorp wards, am I right? Yeah. Okay. I pick it because it's one of the not so good areas, socio-economic. But let's look at it and then think what we can do. When I present an analysis to these are just summaries and they are not analyzed things, okay? So I've simply given these to the church group and asked me that there's the information, you know. If you want me to analyze it, you'll have to pay for me to analyze it. They still have it. It's Trevor Jennings' group, and everyone's got those profiles. But you need to then start analyzing it. You need to give meaning to this. In other words, yes, population group, what that tells you that first one would tell you about the diversity of that particular community. And if you look at it in terms of historical patterns, it can tell you about how it's changed over time. Okay? So an area like Summerstrand is actually very, very interesting because it is now the most diverse area in the city. The numbers have changed very significantly in a short period of time. It doesn't apply to these areas. It doesn't apply to Motherwell. The township areas and the northern areas have to a large extent remain in the same kind of population patterns as under the old dispensation. Gender, again, yeah, it's interesting to know that there's typically a pattern that conforms to on a national level. On a national level, you typically have a little bit more women than you have men. The interesting thing is, the international phenomenon is that more boys are born than girls.
Like it's hard for boys.
But more men like
Let me ask, if you take the census and the person is homosexual, where does that stand on in the stats rating?
They will have, I'm not sure exactly, but you probably will, but in every category you will have another or something like that. So it will be catered in some way or another. I'm just giving you extracts from an old Excel sheet, which will have other variables. So when you look at that particular figure, you can start seeing, well, when this figure goes, the female figure goes over 52, 53, 54, then it starts becoming a particularly female community, but it becomes particularly interesting when you now start combining that again with other things. You start combining it with socio-economic things like income, because there is internationally a big debate about the link between female household heads and poverty. Tendency is big debate, but there's suggestions that there's a strong occurrence correlation between female household heads for a whole host of reasons and poverty. So if you start linking in a particular community this particular variable to household head and to things like dependency and income, then you start becoming aware of a particular demographic group that is under stress and the strain and needs support. You even start putting the age factor to that, and then you start seeing how many old people there are that are household heads. You put a number of these variables together.